We are going to start beginning our notes with a SAT strategy session, and what we will do every week is pick a certain topic and kind of do some questions from that certain topic and try to get you used to it. Keep in mind that these questions will be on your quizzes at the end of the week, so you do want to make sure you catch on to this. But it's things that you will see on SATs, ACTs, and other standardized tests that I just think I need you to have experience with. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do, this week we're going to deal with circles and using the formulas to figure out what's going on. So this says use the figure to determine the area of a circle with the radius of 7.3 inches. Round your answer to the nearest hundredth. First off, this figure is actually a formula from a formula chart, and this is what they would give you on that test. And notice that we want the area of a circle, and so we have to kind of use our common sense here to recognize that we want A, because A stands for area, whereas C stands for something else. So if A is equal to pi r squared, that is the first thing we need to understand. The second thing we need to understand is that this has a radius of 7.3, which means if the radius is 7.3, then I should be putting 7.3 in for r. If you remember what I taught you earlier, I said every time you turn a letter into a number, use parentheses. And so we are looking at area equals pi times 7.3 squared. In your calculator, let's see if I can find the pi button, or if we can find the pi button. First off, pi has a value of 3.14. If you don't know that already, but even if you do know that or don't know that, on your calculator here, if you look at the caret that we use, in blue is the pi symbol, which means that if you want to type in the pi symbol, you simply hit second caret and it brings up pi for you. So you should try that now, because we will be using that all week, and I do want you to actually use the pi symbol, not 3.14, and the difference in the answers might be there, so be careful. So again, second and then the caret, which is like the arrow pointing up, brings up the pi symbol. The beauty of this is that because our calculators are so good, we can just type this in the way we see it. So we would simply type pi, which is second caret, parentheses, 7.3, close, and then squared, equals, and we will get 167.415. Now here's the part where you have to think. They want it rounded to the nearest hundredth, and the way you know where you're going here is you think about the number 100. 100 has 2 zeros, which means that if you want to round this, you will round this to 2 decimal places, and so nearest hundredth means we're cutting off here, which means the number that we're cutting off is 5, and so that 5, as I told you about the club bouncer, is strong enough to push through. So it means we end up with 167.42, not 0.41, because that 5 would actually bump that one up. So again, just make sure you understand how that works. I wanted the area, so I chose the A formula. The radius was 7.3, so I put 7.3 in for r. I hit second caret to plug in the pi symbol. Simply type that in the way it was. I hope you did that with me and did that for yourself before you let me move on. You don't need to write that part, but at least type that in to make sure you get that answer, so you know how to type it in for later, because again, you will see some questions like that on your quiz this week. Now, getting into what we are doing now, we are going to get into chapter 3.1, which is talking about inequalities and their graphs. Today's work is going to focus on some basic ideas that will be present in many of the problems that we'll do this unit. We'll be asked to graph inequalities. An inequality is an equation that uses the symbols that look like these. We call this less than, greater than, less than or equal to. I don't know if you remember that with the line under it, and greater than or equal to. Now, an easy way to remember less than versus greater than is to take the letter L and imagine it getting bent. And notice that the L is still opening the same direction, which means that is what's telling you what you need to know. So less than, if you had to pick one of these to look like an L, is definitely not this, because it opens that way instead of that way. And so less than kind of looks like the bent L is how I remember it. They are fairly simple to work with as long as you follow some basic rules. Rule number 1 in this unit is that the variable must be on the left in order to graph properly. There are times when your work is going to put the variable on the incorrect side. This can be fixed by simply switching all the sides. Look at the examples here. So here's the thing. When you end up with 6 is greater than h, that's what that says, greater than, remember that's not the L. If you have 6 is greater than h needs to be in front. So what we will do is we will flip this over. The h goes over here, the 6 goes over there. But just like my pencil, notice it's pointing to the right. If I turn everything over, the pencil would be actually now pointing to the left. And so you have to think the same thing in terms of the sign. This symbol is actually pointing at the H, so we have to make sure it still continues to point at the H. And that is the first major trick you have to be ready for in this unit. Whenever you have to switch sides, that the sign also switches and continues to point in the direction that it was originally pointing. So make sure you write that down in your notes, because that's what you would turn it into. On this one, -4, remember that's like a L. -4 is less than or equal to T. We want T to be in the front, so we bring the T over, bring over our -4. Notice that the symbol is pointing at the -4, and we want that to continue to point at the -4. So it's T is greater than or equal to -4. Notice again, greater than became less than or equal to became greater than or equal to. In the next one, -5 is greater than or equal to E. Again, E should be in front, so we will put E over here, -5 over there. Our symbol is pointing at E, and so we continue to allow our symbol to point at E, and it becomes E is less than or equal to -5. That is the first thing, again, that you have to deal with when it comes to this unit. Rule number 2 is that the arrow tells us which way to go. If the symbol were the tip of an arrow, it would be pointing in a specific direction. Use the arrow to determine the direction of the graphs. So just in general, if you were to see something that said graph x is greater than 6, you would simply draw a brief short line. It doesn't have to be long, because it only has to be long enough for you to mark however many important numbers there are. In this case, the only important number is 6. And so what we will do is we will go, actually we won't do that yet. What we're going to do is just simply say, is this going to go to the left or right? Notice that this is your symbol, and if you had an arrow, it would be pointing that way, so this would be going to the right. Sorry about that. This one here, if you took the symbol and brought it down and you put a line in it, it would be an arrow going that way, which means that this would be going to the left. And so again, the symbol is like the tip of an arrow if you close it off. The symbol like a tip of an arrow if you close it off, and it tells you the direction that you are going to go. So outside of the basics, the tricky part about the inequality is that some have an open circle and some have a closed circle. The less than symbol means that the value must be smaller than the value that it's being compared to. So consider the following problems. If I had C is less than 8. C is less than 8 means I'm going to look at this graph like I told you earlier, a very short line, with 8 being the important number. First off, if C is less than 8, 8 doesn't count. But there are numbers that are very, very close to 8 that do count, and the way we show that is by simply putting an open circle around that 8 so that you know that we're not including it. Again, the open circle means this is an important point, but we're not going to include that number. And then we look and say that this symbol is pointing to the left, and so we simply shade it to the left and put an arrow at the end. Notice again that the arrow and the symbol look the same, and that is how you will graph it. If you are asked to graph W is less than -2, I don't know why I use the same symbol, but let's go ahead and go with it. Again, -2 being the important number, we put -2 down there on my line. Notice again this is a less than, which means it can't equal -2 because it's different. So we put an open circle there. It's pointing to the left, so we go to the left and we put the arrow, and again notice your arrow symbol looks the same as the symbol there. The same rule applies to the greater than symbol. If we see this symbol, then we will not include the actual value. This means that we will again use an open circle. The less than or equal to symbol, as well as the greater than or equal to symbol, that's these two things, because the line under it is kind of like an equal sign. They will both be graphed with closed circles because they can actually equal the value. So considering these following problems that we are looking at in our notes, if you are asked to graph V is greater than or equal to -5, again greater than because that's not an L, the first thing we do is draw a short line with a -5 because that's the important number. You would then draw a circle around it, but it's equal to 5, so we can include it. So again, this will be closed because of that line. Notice that the symbol itself is pointing to the right, and so we will shade to the right and put an arrow at the top. Notice again the arrow itself looks to be the same as the symbol, which means we did it right. Same thing if we were asked to graph M is less than or equal to 3. Draw your line, put down your 3, which is the important number. Because of this line here saying it's equal to 3, we close the circle and we go off to the left. We draw our arrow, and again notice that the symbol on the arrow looks the same as the symbol in the problem, so we know we did it right. So let's look at some problems of everything put together before moving on to the second portion of our lesson. Putting everything together, you have to remember again, you cannot graph 9 is greater than g. The reason you cannot graph 9 is greater than g is because of, if you go back to rule number 1 and look back in your notes, it says the variable must be on the left. If the problem does not start with the variable, switch it around. So bring the g over, bring the 9 over, flip the sign around. Now we can graph this the way we want to. So 9 here, that has no line under it, which means it's less than 9, so we don't include it. And then we simply shade to the left and put an arrow on it. That's all you have to do today. If you're asked to graph u is less than or equal to negative 8, notice my variable starts, which is good. Negative 8 is my number. This has a line under it, so we close the circle because it's equal to negative 8, and then again this points to the left and put an arrow on it. That arrow means that it goes on forever and ever in that direction. The problem with C is that z, the variable, is on the wrong side, so we have to bring it back in front. Z here, negative 4 there. This is pointing at negative 4, so we will continue to point at negative 4. And now that z is on the correct side, we can bring down the number, close the circle because of the line. Remember, this is greater than or equal to 4, or negative 4, and this is pointing to the right, which means you shade that out and you put the arrow at the top. Last one, graph j is less than negative 9. J is on the right location, so we put our negative 9 down. Open your circle because it's just less than, not less than or equal to. It's pointing to the left, so we aim it to the left, and again we finish that problem off. We will also be asked to look at a graph of something and create an equation for it. This is pretty basic as long as we remember that the closed circle represents less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and that an open circle represents less than and greater than. So look at the following examples of what you're going to be asked to do, and then we're going to get ready to get to the work for the day. If you look at example A, the first thing I know is I can use any variable I want. It will always go first. The second thing you want to know is wherever this is, that is your important number, and so we are going to compare it to negative 1. The third thing I do is I go to the arrow and I kind of highlight the arrow tip, which actually, if you remember working the other direction, gives me my symbol, because notice the arrow tip gives me the symbol, and because this is an open circle, it means that we leave it this way. And that is all you have to do. Write your variable, or choose whatever variable you want. You could put a y or a or whatever you want there. Write down the key number, which in this case is negative 1, because that's where the circle is. Copy the sign from the arrow tip and determine if there is a line under it, whether that circle is open or closed. B looks the same way. Again, I'm going to put an X down. It's at negative 7, so I put that there. Looking at the arrow tip, it goes this way, so that's the symbol I'm going to take with it. And notice that the circle is open, so I leave it that way. That is my answer. It's not that bad, just something you have to make sure you're ready for. C, again, I can put a Y down if I want. Doesn't matter. There's not multiple choice. I just need to pick a variable in general. And so Y is there. The number is negative 4 is the key number. Go to the tip of the arrow and notice that it's pointing this way. So you bring that down. Again, that circle is open because I can see the line in it. And that is my answer. D. Put down your variable. I'm just going to go ahead and use X. The number is at 8. The arrow tip looks that way, so we bring that down. But notice that above the 8 is a closed circle, and that's where you have to be careful today. The arrow of the 8, the point of the 8 is closed, which is why you have to put the sign there, or the equal to part. Because the 8 is closed, remember it's equal to 8 there. It is not equal to 4. It is not equal to negative 7. It is also not equal to negative 1. But this one here actually equals 8, so we put the line under it. And you got to remember that when you do your work today. E, same thing. Put down your variable. Put down your key number. Look at the arrow tip. Notice that it's pointing that way. And then 2 is actually equal there because it does equal 2, so we put a line under it. And that's all you have to do. So today is pretty simple. Overall, it's just making sure you have the basic foundation of graphing. Tomorrow we're going to get more into the actual solving, but for right now, because we're going to have to graph and solve, we want to focus just on making sure you know how the pictures work. So on this, again, we put down our variable, our key number, which is -1. Arrow tip is here, which means bring it down. And notice again the 1 is closed, so we put a line under it and close it off. So what I want you to do now is please log into MathXL. And remember, you work until you earn 100% on this Chapter 3.1 assignment before getting a worksheet. If you do not get a worksheet, that is fine. I will be wrapping things up at the end of the day, but again, just work on this until you get there. Even if I go to work on the problems for the day, if you're still not at 100%, you can feel free to keep working on it. This represents the main part of your computer grade, so in all honesty, you should be working until you get out of here if you have not gotten everything right. Keep in mind, you can ask Mrs. Hines for assistance on this stuff while I'm working on this questions in class or anything else at that time. But other than that, just be sure again to ask questions around me or questions of me or others around you. That is if you're missing the same question. What I'm noticing is that people are missing a question and then they miss it again, and then they miss it again, and they miss it again, and they miss it again, and then their grade doesn't improve. And I look at your grade a week from now and I see that you've attempted the same thing 7, 8, 9 times and I've never heard from you. Once you miss the same question 2 or 3 times, either bring your computer up to me or raise your hand for one of us to come over and help you, or ask a student around you to help you understand it. That way we can identify where you might be having issues in your understanding, and we can try to make these lessons better for you. Other than that, log into MathXL and begin your work. Good luck.